The camera did not catch a thief first. It caught a smile. At 11:42 on a Thursday night, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was rinsing soil from under my fingernails, and the alert on the screen said motion detected, bed 14. I almost ignored it. Spring nights on a small farm are full of false alarms. Raccoons nosing through mulch, wind shaking row covers, a neighbor's cat strolling across the drip lines like it pays taxes. But something about that alert felt wrong because bed 14 was inside the asparagus block, 40 yards past the farm gate, nowhere near the public trail. I dried my hands on a dish towel, tapped the notification, and the screen filled with black and white footage from the solar camera mounted low on the cedar post at the end of the row. For 3 seconds, I just stared. Clean shoes, dress shoes, white sneakers without a speck of mud. A cluster of people moved between my asparagus beds holding plastic cups, laughing softly, stepping over the drip tape like they were walking through a party display at a garden center. One woman crouched down and clipped a young spear with little silver scissors she had no business carrying on my land. Behind her, under the harsh glow of my motion light, stood Carolyn Whitmore, Maple Creek's event chair, wearing a pale cardigan, pearl earrings, and the satisfied expression of a woman who had confused confidence with permission. She lifted one hand toward the rows and said, "Do not worry, the HOA arranged access." I heard it through the gate microphone before I even understood how lucky I was that it had recorded clearly. My name is Logan Pierce, and those asparagus beds were not decoration. They were not community scenery. They were not a rustic backdrop for somebody's spring social. They were 3 years of waiting, weeding, cutting back, feeding crowns, fixing drip lines, testing soil, and trusting that patience would eventually turn into a harvest worth selling. My father planted the first crowns before cancer made his hands too tired for the shovel. I planted the rest after he passed, not because asparagus was easy, but because he used to say the best crops teach you to think beyond one season. That night, while strangers laughed in the dark and Carolyn pointed at my rows like a tour guide, I felt my whole chest go cold. The screen switched as another alert came in. Motion detected, bed 6. Then bed 21. Then gate audio active. Carolyn had no idea the farm was wired that way. She had complained about the cameras for months, calling them unfriendly, unnecessary, bad for guest privacy, as if privacy meant walking onto private land and hoping nobody could prove it. I opened the multi-camera view. Bed 6 showed her unlatching the side gate. The barn camera showed the whole group following her from the Maple Creek walking trail. Bed 14 showed the scissors. Bed 21 showed someone dragging a drip line loose with their heel. The audio at the gate caught a man asking, "This is included, right?" And Carolyn, clear as a bell, answered, "Yes, it is part of the experience." I did not run outside. I did not yell into the darkness. I did not post the video. I stood in my kitchen with the faucet still dripping behind me, watching every timestamp stack itself into evidence. Carolyn thought she had borrowed a farm for ambience. What she had really done was walk herself, smiling, into every camera angle I owned. People think asparagus is simple because it looks simple when it finally reaches the market. Neat green spears bundled with a rubber band, misted under grocery store lights, priced by the pound like it appeared overnight. That is the lie of clean produce. Asparagus is patience with roots. You plant crowns and wait. The first year, you barely touch them. The second year, you still hold back more than you harvest because the bed is building strength underground where nobody can see it. By the third year, if you have watered right, weeded right, mulched right, and protected the crowns through heat, frost, beetles, and careless boots, the spears come up strong enough to make all that waiting feel like a promise kept. My father understood that better than anyone. Pierce Farm was only 12 acres, tucked along the edge of Maple Creek, with a narrow gravel drive, a weathered tool shed, a greenhouse patched with clear panels, and a half-acre of asparagus rows running parallel to the HOA walking trail. It was never a big operation, but it was ours. My parents bought it when Maple Creek was still a soybean field, and the walking trail was just a deer path behind the cottonwoods. Dad started with herbs, cut flowers, and a few raised beds for local restaurants. But asparagus was the crop he loved most because it forced a person to plan beyond their own impatience. I can still see him kneeling at the end of bed 1, pressing mulch around the first crowns with soil under his nails, and that old canvas hat tipped low against the sun. He told me good farming was not about making land obey. It was about paying attention long enough to earn its trust. After he got sick, the farm got quieter. The greenhouse fan sounded louder. The gravel under my boots sounded lonelier. I took over the records, the harvest logs, the invoices, the irrigation schedule, the soil tests, and finally the expansion he had sketched in a notebook before he lost the energy to finish it. Bed 14 was part of that expansion. So was bed 6. So was bed 21. Each one had drip tape buried just beneath the mulch, a small wooden marker, a soil moisture sensor, and a low solar camera because the Maple Creek Trail sat too close for comfort. I did not install the cameras because I mistrusted everyone. I installed them because one wrong footstep in early spring can crush a crown you waited years to harvest. A dog chasing a squirrel can tear a drip line loose. A curious kid can snap spears before they mature. And yes, an entitled adult with a clipboard can decide your farm is charming enough to become public property for one evening. The first time Carolyn Whitmore stopped by, she stood outside the fence in a pale sweater, smiling through the wire like she had discovered a feature included in her dues. She said the rows added warmth to the neighborhood atmosphere. I told her they were crops. She said Maple Creek residents adored rustic beauty. I told her beauty did not cancel ownership. She laughed softly, the way people laugh when they have no intention of hearing you, and said, "Logan, surely there is room for community spirit here." I looked at the asparagus beds, at the cameras blinking quietly in the sun, and I remember thinking that community spirit was a fine thing, as long as it did not come with scissors. Carolyn Whitmore had a talent for making trespassing sound like hospitality. She never raised her voice, never leaned over the fence, never used words that looked ugly on paper. That was what made her dangerous. She could stand there with pearl earrings, a clipboard, and a soft cardigan draped over her shoulders, and somehow make my locked farm gate seem like a personal insult to the neighborhood. She chaired the Maple Creek Events Committee, which meant every season came with a new excuse to turn other people's quiet into her backdrop. Fall wine walks, holiday porch tours, spring garden strolls, charity brunches with tiny sandwiches and donation envelopes. She moved through them all like a woman born holding a sign-up sheet. At first, I tried to be polite because most Maple Creek residents were harmless. They waved from the walking trail. Some bought herbs from my farm stand. A few asked real questions about soil and harvest windows. But Carolyn was different. She did not see the farm as work. She saw it as atmosphere. The second time she came by, she brought 2 board members and stood along the fence pointing toward my asparagus rows while talking about sight lines. I was replacing a drip connector near bed 6, and I could smell damp mulch, warm plastic tubing, and the faint sweetness of chives flowering near the greenhouse. Carolyn called out, "Logan, we are just brainstorming ways to integrate this charming space into the neighborhood experience." I stood up with mud on my knees and told her there was nothing to integrate. Pierce Farm was private agricultural property, not part of Maple Creek, not insured for guest access, and not open for tours. She smiled as if I had offered a starting point. She said the association believed in partnership. I said partnership starts with permission. Her eyes moved to the no trespassing sign on the gate, then to the small black camera above it. "That sign is a little harsh, do you think?" she asked. "Families walk this trail." I told her families could read. After that, the email started. The first one suggested I keep the asparagus rows photo ready during the spring season because they were highly visible from the community trail. The second asked whether I could move my compost bins behind the shed for aesthetic continuity. The third said several residents had expressed concerns about surveillance devices facing a shared recreational area, which was her way of saying my cameras made trespassers uncomfortable before they even trespassed. I answered each email the same way. The cameras faced my property, the beds were crops, the fence was the boundary, and no one had permission to enter. I attached a parcel map. I attached farm insurance language. I attached a photo of the gate with the lock clearly visible. Carolyn responded with one sentence that told me more than she meant to say. Residents have come to view the farm as part of Maple Creek's neighborhood atmosphere. Part of the neighborhood. I read that line twice, then created a folder on my laptop named Carolyn Access Claims. Every email went in. Every voicemail. Every screenshot of Maple Creek event posts showing my farm in the background without permission. I upgraded the cloud backup on the cameras that afternoon and added an extra microphone at the gate the next weekend. Not because I wanted to fight, because my father taught me that when someone starts renaming your property, you do not argue about the name. You document the line. The Spring Harvest Social appeared on Maple Creek's website 3 weeks before the night everything went wrong. I saw it because my farm was in the photo. Not mentioned by name, not credited, not asked about. Just there, blurred behind smiling residents holding wine glasses beside the walking trail. The asparagus rose glowing green in the background like a prop someone had rented with the tent. The event description promised seasonal tastings, garden views, community charm, and an immersive farm-adjacent experience. Farm-adjacent. Carolyn had found a way to stand outside my fence and still sell the inside of it. I emailed her within 10 minutes. I told her Maple Creek did not have permission to use images of my farm in event promotion, did not have access rights, and could not bring guests on a Pierce farm under any circumstances. I copied the HOA board, the property manager, and the General Association email. Carolyn replied the next morning with the same polished softness she used in person. She said the association respected private property and that all activities would remain within community common areas. Then she added that visible agricultural scenery naturally contributed to the character of the trail. Naturally contributed. I printed that email and added it to the folder. Over the next 2 weeks, the trail got busier. Residents slowed near the fence to take pictures. A woman asked if her daughter could pose near the asparagus for graduation photos. A man in golf clothes told me I should be proud the neighborhood appreciated my hard work. I told each person the same thing. You are welcome to buy at the farm stand on Saturday, but the growing rows are closed. Most nodded and moved on. But one afternoon, I found a little white stake near the side gate with a ribbon tied to it, the kind event planners used to mark flow. Flow. That word stuck in my teeth. I pulled the stake, photographed it, and checked the cameras. Carolyn had placed it herself at 4:18 in the afternoon, looking over her shoulder once before pushing it into the ground outside my gate. That was when I added the bed 14 camera, low and angled toward the main row. I added another near bed 21, aimed along the drip tape. I cleaned the barn camera lens. I tested the gate microphone twice, once with the wind coming from the trail and once with the wind coming from the greenhouse. My neighbor, Mrs. Harlan, who sells eggs across the road, watched me on a ladder and asked if trouble was coming. I told her Trouble had already sent a calendar invite. On the evening of the event, I stayed late at the farm until the first string lights flickered on along the trail. The air smelled like damp soil, basil, cut grass, and the sweet perfume of spring flowers Maple Creek had planted along their side of the fence. I could hear music from the clubhouse lawn, soft jazz drifting over the cottonwoods, mixed with laughter and the clink of plastic cups. Carolyn stood near the trail in a pale cardigan, greeting guests like she owned every blade of grass in sight. I locked the side gate at 8:05, pulled once on the chain, photographed it, and drove home to finish invoices. At 11:42, bed 14 told me the truth. The footage from bed 14 showed the first group stepping in at 11:42, but the story had started 12 minutes earlier at the side gate. I know because the gate microphone picked up Carolyn's voice before any camera caught her face. There was music behind her, faint and cheerful, and the soft crunch of shoes on the gravel path. Someone asked if they were allowed to go in there. Carolyn laughed, light and practiced, and said, "Of course, this is part of the spring harvest experience." Then came the metallic click of the latch. I had locked that gate myself, but not with a padlock, because the gate served as a delivery access point during the day and had a simple farm latch with a chain loop. Carolyn lifted the chain like she had done it before, and bed 6 caught her stepping through first, one hand raised behind her as if leading a tour. Behind her came 12 guests, maybe 15, dressed for a social event, not a field. Clean sneakers, soft loafers, light jackets, plastic cups. A woman in white pants stopped just inside the fence and said the rows were prettier up close. Carolyn beamed like she had planted them herself. The barn camera showed the whole line curving between beds 6 and 14, their shadows stretching across the mulch in the motion lights. Bed 21 showed a man stepping backward into the drip tape while taking a picture, his heel dragging the line out from under the straw. He looked down, nudged it with his shoe, and kept smiling. At bed 14, the woman with the little silver scissors crouched near the row and asked which ones were ready. Carolyn pointed toward the spears and said, "Just take a few of the taller ones. Logan has plenty." Hearing my name in her mouth, while she gave away my crop, made my hand tighten around the phone. I wanted to grab my keys. I wanted to drive over there with the headlights on and make everyone explain themselves under the same bright lights they were using to treat my farm like a party favor. But the cameras were still recording, and every second they stayed there, Carolyn was answering questions I had not even asked yet. So I stood in my kitchen with the sink dripping behind me and watched. One guest stepped between rows where nobody should step because asparagus crowns sit underground like sleeping promises, shallow enough that pressure matters. Another leaned over the bed, snapped a spear with her fingers, made a face at the bitter raw taste, and tossed the end near the path. Someone else bumped the wooden marker for bed 6, tipping it sideways. The audio was not perfect, but it was clear enough. I heard Carolyn say, "Maple Creek loves supporting local agriculture." I heard a man ask, "Are we buying these later?" I heard her answer, "It is included tonight." Included. That word landed harder than the scissors. At 11:56, the group started moving back toward the trail. Carolyn was last through the gate. She pulled the chain loop into place, patted it once like she had left everything exactly as she found it, and walked away toward the music. The cameras went quiet one by one. Bed 14 returned to black and white stillness. Bed 21 showed the drip line lying crooked in the mulch. The gate microphone caught laughter fading into the trees. I downloaded every clip before I slept. I saved the raw files, backed them up to the cloud, copied them to an external drive, and wrote the times in my farm notebook beside the harvest schedule for the week. Then I sat there until after 1 in the morning, looking at the still frame of Carolyn smiling under my motion light. She had not just crossed a boundary. She had narrated it. By sunrise, the asparagus block looked like a quiet room after someone had lied in it. Nothing was dramatic from a distance. The rows still ran straight. The mulch still held the night's moisture. The first light still touched the spears with that pale green shine my father used to call the color of work paying off. But when I stepped through the gate at 6:18, the damage started speaking in details. Bed 14 had footprints pressed into the soft soil between crowns, narrow and deep where dress shoes had no business being. 14 spears had been cut too low or broken by hand, leaving ragged ends that would not grade for market. Bed 6 had a marker kicked sideways, the wood splintered where someone had stepped on it. Bed 21 was worse. The drip tape had been pulled from its line and bent hard at the connector, and water had leaked through the night, darkening the mulch in a crooked stain that smelled like wet straw and clay. Near the side gate, I found 2 plastic cups tucked against the fence, a cocktail napkin with the Maple Creek logo, and the little white ribbon stake I had pulled before, now lying in the grass like it had come back to laugh at me. I did not touch anything at first. I walked the perimeter slowly, filming with my phone, letting the morning audio catch the birds, the gravel under my boots, the soft drip from the damaged line. Then I took still photos, wide and close. Footprint with ruler. Broken spear with bed label. Drip connector. Gate latch. Plastic cup. Napkin. Fence line. I opened my farm notebook to the harvest schedule and made a new section. Event damage. Spring harvest social. Bed 6. Bed 14. Bed 21. Gate entry. I wrote the times from the footage beside each item. My handwriting looked calmer than I felt. That mattered. Paper has a way of remembering tone better than people do. By 8 o'clock, I had downloaded the full camera archive again, checked that the cloud backups were complete, and exported clips with timestamps burned into the corner. I matched Carolyn's outfit from the footage to photos Maple Creek had already posted online from the event. Same pale cardigan, same pearl earrings, same silver bracelet. I matched the guests in bed 14 to a group photo under the clubhouse string lights, not to embarrass them, but to prove the timeline. Then I called Daniel Price, a local attorney who handled small farm leases, crop loss claims, and insurance disputes for growers who could not afford to be ignored. He listened while I talked, then asked whether I had posted anything publicly. I said no. He said, "Good. Do not give them a stage before you give them a file." That sentence kept me steady. By noon, Daniel had me send the footage, photos, parcel map, prior emails, insurance language, repair estimate for the drip system, and my expected harvest loss from the damaged beds. He also told me to notify the sheriff's office, not because I wanted a scene, but because a documented incident report mattered if Carolyn tried to shrink the story into a misunderstanding. So I did it all in order. No rant, no post, no angry caption, just evidence moving from camera to folder to counsel to record. Carolyn had used a party to make my farm look public. I was going to use timestamps to make the truth impossible to edit. Carolyn's first response came at 3:17 that afternoon, and it sounded exactly like I expected it to sound. Polished, soft, and built to make the truth look blurry. She wrote that she was sorry I felt concerned about guest proximity to my garden area during a community event. Garden area. Proximity. Felt concerned. Every word was chosen to shrink what had happened into something harmless and emotional, like I had overreacted to people admiring flowers from a sidewalk. She said guests may have wandered briefly near an open boundary, and that any contact with the plants was accidental and minimal. Then she added the line that told me she still thought I had one camera at the gate and nothing more. Since the area was dark and crowded, no one can be certain who entered where. I read that sentence sitting at my kitchen table while the exported clips loaded on my laptop, each file labeled by bed number and timestamp. Bed 6, gate entry. Bed 14, cutting. Bed 21, drip line. Barn wide angle. Gate audio. No one can be certain. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Daniel Price called 10 minutes later and told me not to answer her directly. He drafted the claim instead, clean and dry, the way documents get when they are done arguing. Unauthorized entry onto private agricultural property. Crop damage. Irrigation damage. False representation of access rights. Event-related liability. Preservation of video, photos, social media posts, guest lists, planning records, and insurance coverage. He sent it to the HOA board, the property manager, Carolyn, Maple Creek's event insurer, and the association attorney. By morning, the tone changed. The property manager asked for copies of the footage. The insurer asked whether the beds were commercially productive. The board president, who had stayed quiet through Carolyn's emails for months, asked for a private call. Carolyn, meanwhile, sent one more message to the board claiming the guests had briefly stepped near a decorative row and that I was escalating a neighborly misunderstanding. Decorative row. That was her mistake. Daniel forwarded the still image from bed 14, showing a guest crouched between labeled asparagus beds, scissors in hand, with Carolyn visible in the background pointing down the row. Then he attached the audio transcript. Do not worry, the HOA arranged access. The conversation went cold after that. 2 days later, I was asked to attend the Maple Creek board meeting. I brought my laptop, an external drive, printed photos, repair estimates, parcel maps, and my harvest notes. I walked into the clubhouse smelling faintly of damp mulch and printer ink, with the same boots that had stood beside bed 21 that morning. Carolyn sat at the front in a pale cardigan, chin lifted, acting like the room itself was on her side. When I entered, she did not look at the folder in my hands. She looked at the cameras mounted in the corners of the clubhouse, then quickly away. That was when I knew she understood the part she had missed. Cameras do not care who sounds confident. They only remember who crossed the line. The board meeting room was smaller than I expected, or maybe it only felt that way because everyone inside was trying not to breathe too loudly. Maple Creek had arranged folding chairs in 2 rows, a long table at the front, and a projection screen against the wall beside a framed photo of the walking trail. The air smelled like lemon cleaner, coffee, and the faint floral perfume Carolyn always wore. She sat with her hands folded over a printed agenda, the picture of calm concern, but her eyes kept flicking toward my laptop. Daniel had told me to keep it simple. No speeches, no anger, evidence first. So when the board president asked me to explain what happened, I connected the laptop, opened the first file, and let bed 6 speak. The screen showed the side gate at 11:30 at night, gray and grainy under the motion light. Carolyn appeared first, lifting the chain, opening the latch, turning back to wave guests through. Nobody in the room said a word. Then I played the gate audio. Someone asked, "Are we allowed in there?" Carolyn's voice answered, clear enough to make the room tighten. Of course, this is part of the spring harvest experience. I paused the video and let the silence do its work. Then came bed 14. The woman with the silver scissors crouched between the rows. Carolyn pointed toward the spears. A guest laughed. A hand clipped the first spear too low. I could hear someone shift in a chair behind me. That tiny, uncomfortable sound people make when denial starts costing money. Bed 21 came next, showing the drip line pulled loose by a heel, water leaking into the mulch. The barn camera showed the whole group moving inside the fence, not wandering near an open boundary, not briefly stepping close to a decorative row, but following Carolyn across private agricultural beds she had no right to offer. I showed the still photos after that. Footprints, broken spears, the Maple Creek napkin, the bent connector, the bed markers, the parcel map, the prior emails where I said no access, the event post with my farm in the background, the repair estimate, the harvest loss calculation. I kept my voice even, because the videos were louder than I needed to be. Carolyn tried once. She said the footage lacked context. Daniel, sitting beside me, opened the transcript and read only one line back to her. The HOA arranged access. She did not answer. The insurer's representative, who had joined by video call, asked whether the event was officially sanctioned by Maple Creek. The board president looked at Carolyn. Carolyn looked at the agenda. That was answer enough. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted to suspend all farm-adjacent events, preserve Carolyn's planning records, and submit the claim to insurance. They also agreed to send residents a notice clarifying that Pierce Farm was private property with no public access. As I packed up my laptop, Carolyn stood near the doorway, pale and stiff, no clipboard in her hands for once. I walked past her without a word. Outside, the trail was dark, and beyond the fence, the cameras on my asparagus beds blinked quietly in the night like patient little witnesses. The claim was approved 9 days later, and the email arrived while I was standing beside bed 21 with a new drip connector in my hand. I read it twice under the morning sun while water moved cleanly through the repaired line, darkening the mulch in one straight ribbon instead of the crooked stain Carolyn's guests had left behind. Maple Creek's insurer agreed to cover the crop damage, irrigation repairs, documentation costs, and the added boundary fencing Daniel had included in the demand. The HOA board voted to reimburse my legal fees separately, not because they suddenly loved farmers, but because the footage gave them nowhere else to stand. Carolyn was removed from the events committee before the next newsletter went out. The official wording said she was stepping back from community programming. That was polite enough for them. The truth was simpler. She had turned private crops into a party feature and let cameras record every second of it. A week after that, Maple Creek sent the correction notice to every resident. Pierce Farm is private agricultural property. No access is permitted without written permission. Crops, beds, gates, and farm equipment are not community amenities. I printed that notice and pinned it inside the tool shed beside my father's old planting calendar. It looked plain there, almost boring, but it felt like a fence made of words. The new boundary signs went up along the trail before the next weekend. Not ugly, not hostile, just clear. Private farm. Please stay on trail. The side gate got a real lock, the cameras stayed, and the gate microphone kept listening to wind, birds, and the occasional curious voice stopping exactly where it should. Some residents avoided me after that, which was fine. Others came to the farm stand on Saturday with quiet apologies tucked between purchases. One woman bought 3 bundles of asparagus and said she had believed Carolyn when she called it a shared experience. A man who had been at the event offered to pay for the spears his wife cut. I told him the claim was handled, but he still bought herbs, left cash in the jar, and said he would not cross the fence again. That mattered more than I expected. Justice did not make the damaged spears grow back. It did not erase the footprints or give me back the hours I spent building a file instead of sleeping. But by the time new shoots pushed up in bed 14, straight and green through the mulch, the farm felt like mine again. I stood there at sunrise with damp soil on my boots and the cameras blinking softly on their cedar posts, and I thought about my father saying the best crops teach patience. He was right. So tell me, if someone smiled while turning your hard work into their entertainment, would you have posted in anger or waited until the evidence could speak for itself? And if stories like this remind you that quiet proof can protect what loud people try to take, stay with this channel, because sometimes justice is not shouted across a fence. Sometimes it is recorded from 3 angles and backed up before sunrise.